Good evening and welcome to this evening's live streamed webinar all around my calling. My name's Sarah Hulme. I'm part of the God for All team, and one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is the Vocations project across Cumbria. And I'm delighted to be joined this evening by a few of our amazing team of volunteers. We're going to give you an opportunity to hear some encouraging stories that have been emerging during lockdown. We're also going to be joined later on by Bishop Emma, who'll be sharing her thoughts with us. And we're really looking forward to spending the next hour exploring my calling. If you've got any questions at all, the chat is open. Please say hello, let us know where you're joining us from, and feel free to post any questions for the team. We're going to be having a little Q&A session towards the end of this hour together. If you're watching this later on as a recording, then all the contact information you need is also on the Vocations page of the diocesan website. That appears just below now. And do please get in touch. So this evening, we'd like to think a little bit about what is God's plan for you and for me. What are you and I being called by God to be and to do? And how do we go about exploring this further? So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to some of the team for introductions. And the first up is Reverend David Newlove, who is the District Mission Officer for the Methodist Church in Cumbria. David.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you. Hi, it's great to be with you all tonight and to be a part of this programme. As Sarah said, I'm the Methodist District Mission Officer, which is a great title, especially because everything that we do in church is connected to mission. In one way or another, so I share in a variety of tasks, from sharing with and supporting those in ordained ministry, to sitting with others in a group in this Vocations team, to helping shape the Methodist local lay pastor scheme, working alongside Alison Fenter, and the Diocesan Authorised Lay Training Pathway, ALTP, and sharing in a team that is looking at whole life discipleship, which among other things asks, how do we worship in our work and leisure, and how do those aspects of our life feed into our worship? Alongside this, my substantive role is as a Methodist presbyter in North Cumbria, that's in and around Carlisle. And within that, working as a hospital chaplain and a chaplain to the Borderway Auction Mart, and as part of the leadership of 4 mission teams, mission communities. And as part of my Methodist district role, I was involved in the creation of a series of 6 vocation roadshows. These would have taken place during June and July. It's sad but understandable that we couldn't run these, but it's a great consolation that I'm able to share in this programme tonight. So enough from me for now. I'm going to hand over to my friend Chris, who will introduce himself. Chris.
Thanks, David. My name's Chris Nuttall, and I became the Vocations Co-ordinator for North Cumbria just 2 months ago, having moved to Penrith last year for my wife to become a children and families worker here. For the first 23 years of my working life, I worked as a computer developer and then a project manager for Boots the Chemist in Nottingham, where I also served as church warden, the treasurer, PCC secretary, fortunately not all at the same time, in a small inner city church near to Queen's Medical Centre. When I was made redundant, I changed career direction and I worked for 15 years in a variety of administrative roles for the Christian charity Care, for Lichfield Cathedral and for Scripture Union. So now I'll hand over to Viv to introduce herself. Over to you, Viv.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. My name is Viv Stirrett and I'm the Vocations Co-ordinator for the south of the county, working alongside a dedicated team of Vocations advisors. I'm one of 2 lay ministers at St Michael and All Angels, and amongst a lot of other things that I'm involved in, I'm kept really busy. My background has been in the field of human resources in one shape or another, but I've specialised in employment law and work in the area of occupational psychology. And both of these areas made a significant contribution to the mediation work that I was undertaking latterly, particularly with the NHS. Well, that's enough about me. Let's hear from Val, Vocations Coordinator for the West.
Hello, thanks, Viv. I'm Valerie Hall. I'm a member of Workington Mission Community and, as Viv says, coordinator for the West. As far back as I can remember, I've always longed to see people realise their full potential. That's realise as in recognise that they have potential, and also realise as in achieve that potential. So I trained as a careers advisor and practiced for over 20 years, and then latterly worked in the wider field of secondary and post-16 education, developing networks and partnerships between education and training providers. When austerity bit into our local authority funding, I was offered and accepted early retirement. Since then, I've been grateful that God has put me to work serving him in new settings. So when the Vocations Advisors team was developing, I felt drawn to it. I love it when people recognise that God is calling them, often when they're not really sure what to, so that we can explore that together. I would say that if it's from God, it will probably take you out of your comfort zone and present some challenges, but he'll lead you into becoming more fully yourself. I've had some wonderful conversations in my role as a vocations advisor, and I look forward to many more. We're now going to show a short video under the hashtag #MyCalling, which includes snippets of a conversation between Bishop James and Reverend Dr. Alison Fenton, who's a member of the God for All team in our ecumenical county of Cumbria. Within her role, she has responsibilities around the development and equipping of lay ministries. You'll also meet some individuals whose Christian discipleship has led them into particular forms of service. You may find more of the interview and a wider selection of people pursuing their calling if you follow the link in the banner below the video, but please wait for the webinar to close. Thank you.
Somebody once described the church to me as much more like an orchestra than a bus. Very often been seen as rather like a bus, where the vicar is the one who drives and conducts and takes the fares and does everything, and everybody else is a sort of passenger, and they're taken to their appropriate destination. In an orchestra, the vicar is more like the conductor, and everybody else has their own particular part to play. They've got their own particular instrument, and they contribute in a crucial way to the overall music that's taking place. That's how I see lay ministry in the diocese. Absolutely crucial that all of us are involved. It's been described as every member ministry in the past, but I see that as absolutely vital for the future.
I've been worshiping at St Mike's for 3 years. So I started when I came to uni in Carlisle. And at the end of my uni, my vicar kind of came up to me and was like, "Hey, Sarah, what do you think about being an intern?" And I was like, "Nigel, I'm not going to lie, I've got a lot on right now." Come back and ask me that in like a month's time. As the weeks went on, things sort of fell into place that sort of, or like my heart was just, yeah, it was really being put on my heart. And I feel like if something is being put on your heart that much, then maybe it's sort of meant to be there for a reason. People are putting a lot of trust in me to plan stuff and to, like achieve things. And I think it's really cool to be doing that in a Christian environment because there's just so much support. It's really built on my confidence and also just to get really sort of Christian, sort of my trust in God. Like a lot of the things that I've done have definitely been led in certain directions that I could never have like thought of myself. So it's been really cool to see how God is working through the internship and through me and through others for me as well. Like that's been really cool.
In the past, people have seen vocation as being something that applies only to monks and nuns and clergy and people who've got some kind of religious uniform. Whereas actually, of course, all of us have a vocation. There's a lovely book called or collared by somebody called Francis Stewart, who he says all of us have a triple vocation. We're called to be a disciple of Jesus first, and then we're called to develop our gifts and have a particular ministry, which is for us, our ministry, second. And third, and I particularly like this, he says all of us are called to sing our own particular distinctive song.
I'm always growing, and I don't see that I'll be doing anything different unless God calls me to do something else. And that's probably the key bit, really, because I fell into this particular role. I wasn't expecting to be a worship leader. I wasn't inclined to even put myself forward to play my music in front of other people and with other people. So I'm sure God will have a plan for me when it comes to me growing up. Whether that be I play until I die and I, step into heaven, then so be it. But if he calls someone else to take over, that would be great as well. I can take a step back. But whether that happens in reality, I don't know.
So here we are now with people singing their songs. I think I'm asking how we turn it into a choir actually now.
That's a really good analogy. Yeah, I think that's just so important. Like you, I've been hugely impressed by so many people I've seen right around the diocese and in all our various ecumenical contexts, in all our different denominations, exercising wonderful ministries, very often in a very humble, undemonstrative way, but hugely effective, and reaching out, caring for people, sharing their faith in a very simple way.
I feel called to work with children and young people and families because I guess I have a natural affinity with them, or just feel drawn to children and relating with them. So specifically in exploring that calling and seeing a gap in what our church put on for children, Messy Church seemed like a really good idea to try out, really. We've got a team of sort of 10 volunteers who all take on different jobs, and so together we put on a Messy Church every other month. And it's lovely to see families coming who, as far as I know, they've not stepped foot in a church before, or wouldn't really consider going to church on the kind of Sunday church. So yeah, it's really encouraging to feel that I can be someone who, along with a team, can put something on that can really be relevant and bring, hopefully, the relevance of God along with community and just coming together and getting to know each other.
We can only grow as individuals if we discover the gifts God has given us and begin to use them. That's a big part of what discipleship is all about, and that's really what we're talking about here. Lay ministry is discipleship. It's being a follower of Jesus. We grow ourselves as we discover our gifts and as we use them, and we discover we can do things we would never have believed possible. I've talked to so many people over the years who say, I'm now leading the prayers in church, I'm preaching, I'm talking about my faith to other people. And had you said I would do that, 5 years ago, I would have laughed in your face and said that's absolutely impossible, not something I could ever begin to contemplate. So our own growth comes from exercising a ministry, and that's true whether we're lay or ordained.
So, conductor in an orchestra, each person playing to their own gifting and strength, and probably, or maybe in reality, doing far better than the conductor could do themselves. Vocation is for all, and hearing one another's stories is so inspiring. Are we formally a choir, informally choir or an orchestra? Or is it just church? As disciples and in our ministry to sing our own song. A nudge, an inner calling, or just filling the gap. All this requires that 360 degree of listening to our heart, our context, listening to others in our community, and of course, listening to God. So let's hear from some people who have found the next step, that next step on their path through this time of isolation. We hear first from Debbie Bowler from St. Bees Priory, who was inspired by 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 14. And she writes this: Priory pals and more. This small group came about on WhatsApp because I realized there were several folk I knew who were not necessarily on Facebook and were missing out on information and general chat at a time in the early days of lockdown which was quite scary. We shared little funnies that happened, quiz type things, and had a couple of bake-offs which were fun and productive. We would normally have seen each other out and about, and certainly on a Sunday. So this helped our spirit of community and sharing in a positive way. I shall keep the group out as a reminder in the future of how, despite being physically apart, we could support, reassure, and laugh together, knowing that we shared God's love through our communication with one another in what were and are to be still frightening times. Without it, some in the group would have missed the Thursday evening clap and sing from our bedroom window with Frank on the keyboard, which floated out towards the beach. For those who used it, it provided a link to the outside and helped us feel less isolated. Thanks, Debbie. An inspiring story. And now Val is going to introduce some more inspirational lockdown stories to us. Thanks, Val.
Thank you, David. I want to introduce you to David and Esther Herbert. They're members of St Nicholas Flimby, and which is part of Criffleview Mission Community. Hello, both.
Hello.
Hello.
First of all, did you have a particular role in church before lockdown happened?
Yeah, so we have been involved in leading a family service at church, which was happening once a month. We're from quite a small church, there's about 12 of us usually, but it was really great to see that was growing. We had met for breakfast before the family service, and it was great because the whole church were involved in ownership of that, and it was actually great to see new families coming in who don't normally come to church, and actually becoming regular members of that congregation, I guess. But yeah.
How did you realise God was asking something new of you?
It was much more of a need that appeared, and a realisation that something needed to fill it. So when lockdown first happened, or when churches were told they weren't allowed to meet, we were very conscious that we were not going to be able to meet together in worship, and how we were going to take on that challenge, and realising that certainly within St Nicholas Church, if not the wider team, we were probably the only people who would have the technical whereabouts and the go, we'll say that, to actually try and do something. So we basically set about trying to set up online worship for our church, which we did, and that has been going on pretty much from the very first Sunday, Mother's Day. Very ropey to begin with, but improving to being less ropey. We'll call it that.
Well, talking about less ropey, let's just see something that introduces the service each Sunday morning now.
It's time for church.
It's time for church.
It's time for church.
Good morning. It's time for Sunday worship. It's time for church.
It's time for church.
It's time for church.
Thank you for that. It certainly was good fun. What's happened as a result of the development that you've had?
Yeah, so what started out as on the very first Sunday when churches weren't open, as sort of muddling our way through, just us, it's now great because we've got people from all the different churches in the Maryport team involved in doing different bits. We have a family service, well, virtual family service on the first Sunday of the month, and then slightly different styles of service on each week. We've also, when there's been a fifth Sunday in the month, we've had the opportunity to do like a mission community virtual service, which has been great as well to get the extra members of our wider sort of community involved. It's been going really well, actually. We've got people who are joining and watching the church services that aren't members of any of the physical churches, but have been able to sort of engage in what feels like a safe space to dip in and see what all this is about. So that's been really encouraging, hearing those stories and actually being able to sort of support each other.
It is a window because it's far less intimidating to just turn on a video for a minute, 20 seconds, whatever it is, rather than walking into a church building. So it's actually a completely different opening that wouldn't necessarily have existed. Yeah. So it's amazing how God does work in these moments. It really is.
Yeah.
And for you two personally, step forward, what's the next step, do you think?
So in terms of the church stuff, we're keeping it going for now because who knows what's happening. And also it's nice to actually have that different kind of outreach and opportunity. And in terms of for personally, we're kind of waiting to see what God has got planned. It's always a bit of a journey and an exploration. I'm going to be doing, there's an emerging leaders course that Keswick Ministries are putting on for people in their 20s and 30s that's running online in early October. So I'm going to be doing that, and then we'll just wait and see, I guess.
Thank you very much, both Esther and David. Really appreciated the time. Thank you. And closer to home now in Workington, I'm looking forward to speaking to Rachel, who I normally see at church now, but previously wasn't able to during the lockdown. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Val.
Good to see you. And I know about Rachel because I'm one of the beneficiaries of the thing that came out for her. What were you doing before lockdown, Rachel, in terms of your church role?
Yeah, so I've been a member of St John's Church in Workington. I also help out on the altar as well. So there's a few of us on the rota there. So whether that's acolyting or helping prepare communion, I also do that as well in St John's.
Right, great. Yep. And then when lockdown happened, how did you realise God was asking something of you?
Yeah, I think everybody was probably in the same boat, that we were sort of knew lockdown was going to happen, but yet when it happened, it seemed to be, such a shock to us all. Sort of our way of life changed overnight. I live on my own. I'm quite lucky that I have got my family close by, but you still couldn't just call in like you normally would. So it was, complete shock. And I remember going out one day, I just round the town, and I just realised how quiet it was. I miss the people, I miss the community that church brings, and the togetherness when you're there, and the conversations you have. And I just thought, would there be something we could do to almost bring news from church out to people in the homes, people who couldn't get out, particularly those who didn't have access to the internet, Facebook, for example, to watch the live services that were happening. And then the idea of a newsletter sort of came about. A simple one-page sheet with the readings on one side and news from church on the other side. And that's where that idea came from, really.
Great, yeah. Thank you. And we've got some notes we can show on screen, actually, of some of the feedback that you've had as to what it's meant to people.
Yeah.
You've got a very natural ability to style something, so you put this together for us, and it does give a feel for how we're working together as two churches, which is something that's grown, I think, through this newsletter.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I definitely think so. And initially I had, great support from both Frankie and Peter, who really helped develop the newsletter. So we put in sort of news from them, piece of the sermon. And not only that, were there any things going on around the county that we could advertise on the newsletter? What other churches were were doing, etc. So we were able to use that as a vehicle to advertise different events, alongside things like the BBC. So could we listen to, you know, prayer of the day, prayer of the week on the radio? And not only that, you know, we had an opportunity for people who maybe couldn't get messages out. We use a newsletter to pass on messages throughout the church as well. So it really became something that really took off, and was really pleased to see that people were using it in that light as a way to spread messages when we couldn't at the time, as couldn't meet together in church.
So it went out to a big email list, but also I was one of the distributors, and I really appreciated going around, and I popped the letter through the letterbox and then knocked and stood back. And I've had some wonderful conversations on the doorstep that I probably wouldn't have been able to have over coffee and at church. And there's a real sense of a growing community as a result. And for you, Rachel, what might the future hold?
Yeah, I think as well, it made me sort of realise how much I value church in my life, and how much I missed it when we couldn't go, and how much I look forward to getting back. And I know that was some of the feedback from people as well. So again, we weren't we're all in the same boat. But it's just made me realise how I can explore my thoughts a bit deeper, and so I'm looking currently to see what I could do to explore my thoughts and, you know, discover more really. So that's what I'm hoping to do in the near future.
Let's have some more conversations.
Yeah,
Thanks,
definitely.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Val.
Bye
Thank
then.
you.
See you. Okay, well, that's wonderful. I'm going to pass over to Viv now, who's been talking to a couple of people. Well done, everybody who's taken part so far.
Thank you, Val. Really inspiring stories there. Really well appreciated. I'd like to introduce to you my two guests, Jenny Marks and Brian Smalley. Both
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Dave.
Just lost Viv very briefly, so if you just bear with me, she's back in. Hang on.
I'm not quite sure what happened with internet and technology there, but both Jenny and Brian are church wardens whose existing ministries and vocations have developed during the months since March. We're going to speak to Jenny first. Jenny's not only a church warden, but also the editor of the community magazine. Jenny, welcome. Can you explain to everyone what you've been called upon to do during the recent months?
Thanks, Viv. Yes, the March lockdown hit us all very quickly, and I think we all experienced that immediate sense of loss and uncertainty when our church buildings were closed. But the new normal actually opened up new inspiration. Having retired from a technology-related job several years ago, I realised that I could offer to help to get our church services online. Although we already had a church website, streaming was new to me, but I did feel called to give it a go. And it was actually very exciting to realise that it's never too late to develop a new skill, and particularly one that offers such a rewarding spirit of connection and friendship despite our isolation, not just to our congregation, but to our neighbouring parishes and the wider community as well.
Well, it's certainly a wonderful thing to be able to create a way to connect with people despite the lockdown and the isolation that people were feeling. Tell me, what's been the impact on you of developing these skills and following this calling?
I've certainly felt a strong sense of vocation and mission in bringing people together through shared worship online. I've had some wonderful feedback from people listening to our weekly audio services of worship and music, and watching the special YouTube video services recorded by members of the congregation. It's also been a real delight to enable those taking part to develop their confidence with technology too, and hopefully help them to communicate with their family and friends in a way that they would perhaps never have imagined.
I'm sure you're absolutely right. Tell me, Jenny, do you think that there is a future for this technology within the church?
Absolutely. Although our church is now reopened for public worship each Sunday, the demand is continuing for the online services too, even from those attending the services in church. People have expressed their gratitude for being able to re-listen to the worship in their own homes to gain a greater depth of understanding, and to hearing familiar voices and joyous music as a reminder of the strength of our church family. I'm really very proud of what we've achieved together as a team, and I would certainly encourage anyone to do the same. It's not as scary as you think.
Well, it's certainly not as scary for you as it would be when we started on this journey. No. As someone who's seen what Jenny's put together week after week, I can say that her skills and her knowledge and her understanding in this area now is truly valued. Thank you very much, Jenny.
Thanks, Viv.
I'd like now to speak to Brian. Brian, being a church warden, is doing a really important ministry at this time, and being a church warden is important in any church. What have you done during lockdown, Brian, that you haven't been called upon to do under normal circumstances?
Hi, Viv. Well, in the early days of the lockdown, the practical things we had to do was in maintaining the security of the church, making sure it was safe, making sure that we fulfilled our responsibilities to the wider community. Church wardens, as you know, aren't appointed just by the congregation, they're appointed by the community and the parish. So we do have a responsibility there. And this became immediately more apparent, I think, in the early days of the lockdown. As the lockdown went on, of course, we started getting vast swathes of documentation from the government and from the diocese with advice on what we needed to do and how to prepare eventually for reopening. And that led into, seamlessly really, the process of risk assessment. Now, this was a new area for me. I mean, I've done a little bit with schools because I'm a school governor, but having to establish a risk assessment from scratch for the church in a particular set of circumstances was quite a challenge, and it took me into new areas.
I suspect that the risk assessment is all to do with the health and safety and welfare of our congregations, and that, of course, is a weighty responsibility during this time to make sure that we have a safe environment for our congregations, and for them to come in and feel safe and secure and to keep coming back week after week because they do feel safe and secure. So we certainly thank you for all the work that you've done.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the success of what we've done, and I am just part of a team, which you're a part as well, and Jenny. But on our first reopening Sunday in July, 12th of July, we would have been happy with 8 to 10 people turning up, and we actually had 24, and that number has increased. So that every Sunday morning now we're getting over 30, and now I think our maximum number so far has been 38. And one of the good things is that it's not the same 38 people. Some people obviously don't come every week, so a large number of people obviously feel safe in the environment we've created. We've done all the things. We've measured 2 meter distances, and we've taken pews out of use. We've taken away things that people touch and play with and listening to a boring sermon. So we've done all we can to make people safe. And I think the success of what we've done is in the numbers who are attending each Sunday morning.
That's brilliant, Brian. Thank you for that. And just another quick question. I particularly know that you've been involved in other things, but can you tell everybody what else you've been called to do during these recent troublesome months?
Well, even before the official lockdown started, we realised that there was a serious situation developing, and so we decided as a church to set up a community support group. Even I say, while we were still having church services regularly, we set up a dedicated email address called Be Them Aid, which people could contact if they needed help. I gave my own telephone number, in fact, as a contact for people to ring up, because we knew that they were going to be in a community like ours, where there are a lot of elderly people, even more elderly than me. People were going to need help with shopping, collecting prescriptions, being taken to the doctor for appointments when that was possible. And we thought setting up this community aid organisation was important, and it's proved to be so, quite useful. And I think when we eventually come out of the total lockdown and the pandemic is over, I envisage this support network continuing to exist to help people in the not just the church congregation, but in the community.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Brian. It's a wonderful example of actually taking church out into the community. Well, we do hope that you found these reports energising and motivational. These recent months have certainly been a challenge, but they've also provided a great opportunity for individuals and the church to develop ministries which satisfy real needs. And it's up to every person in every church to spot and develop individuals who demonstrate aptitude and a Christian calling, so that a variety of shared ministries can be developed into strong teams. Let's give these people a tap on the shoulder and a nudge in the right direction. And with that in mind, I'll hand you over to Chris with a gentle reminder as well to make sure that you ask any questions at the end of the session. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Viv. It's been great, isn't it, to hear some of these stories, and there are many more of people who have discovered their new calling and a new sense of vocation over the last few months. During my working life, my greatest job satisfaction always came from seeing people developing, growing, discovering new skills and abilities that they didn't realise they had. And at the same time, although our church in Nottingham was very small, for 10 years, we had a vicar who encouraged members of the congregation to try different things. So many of us were asked occasionally to lead services, perhaps to preach, to lead intercessions, or to join the music group, for instance. People who wouldn't necessarily have put themselves forward. And I recall being amazed sometimes at the unexpected gifts some of them had, which I'd just not realised. We met up for a reunion last year, about 20 years afterwards, and discovered how many of us had gone on to serve God elsewhere in the country, either in ordained ministry, as readers, some were children's workers, some had joined Christian organisations like myself, and some were serving God in their secular employment, which is just as important. God had a vocation for each of us, whether we were university graduates, bus drivers, doctors, teachers, social workers, black or white. We just needed someone to encourage us to test things out and see what we could and couldn't do. So I found out that whilst I was not a leader, I was a good number two, making things happen through my organisational ability. And that changed the course of my life, leading me into charitable administration. All of us can be an encourager. We don't need to be clergy to do that. Many church members can belittle their own ability, and we need others to get alongside us and help us to see ourselves as God sees us. And that's really what this webinar has been about. You could be that person who taps someone on the shoulder and encourages them to find their true vocation and calling. What a privilege that is. We're delighted to be joined by Bishop Emma, who's going to share more with us now of her reflections of calling and discovering our vocation. Don't forget that you can write any questions in the chat for our panel to discuss soon. So over to you, Bishop Emma.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for what wonderful stories we've heard so far. Now, I want to begin by asking you a question. What did you want to be when you grew up? Now, perhaps some of you listening to this might think that you've never actually grown up and you're still looking for what you might be. So perhaps the question might be, however old you are, what do you want to be when you grow up? I think I still hold out the vain hope that I might be an actor or a doctor when I grow up. And I think sometimes when it comes to thinking about vocation, perhaps we start in the wrong place. And we tend to take a kind of what do you want to be when you grow up sort of approach. And that's the idea that there are a few special jobs and you just need to find the one that has your name on it. Even worse, I think we do sometimes tend to talk as if the only special jobs are the ones that happen in around churches. And we tend to start with the church and think, well, what jobs need to be done? And it's been wonderful tonight to hear what people have been doing and how they've been encouraging both church and community. But I think sometimes we tend to think, well, we need more vicars or we need more lay readers. So how can we get them? Or we need more flower arrangers or Sunday school teachers. So how can we get them? And whilst flower arrangers and Sunday school teachers and readers and vicars are all very important and very fulfilling roles, and we do need more of them, I'm not sure that's starting in the right place. And I think to start in the right place when it comes to vocation, we need to start with God. And that's never a bad place to start, in my view. God, who is love and who made the world and loves the world. And God, who made the world and loves it, asks people, that's you and me, to join in with him in taking care of it. And to do that, he needs lots of different people doing lots of different things in his name and for his purposes. And that's what vocation is. What God asks you to do for him in love for his world. When God called Moses by means of a burning bush. Now that's very hard to miss, isn't it? I don't think we use enough burning bushes in our vocation and discernment work. When God called Moses to join in with him in liberating his people from slavery, it's really telling that when Moses says to God, look, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? What qualifications have I got, says Moses. Why are you choosing me? What is it about me that makes you think I can do this? And God's reply to him is very simple. I will be with you. It's not about Moses. It's about God being with him. So that's the starting place, God and his call. And then I wonder if thinking about vocation is thinking about, well, what is God asking me to join in with him in doing? What God asks us to do for him is God's way of doing stuff in the world. I really love a quote by Martin Luther, who's a 16th century theologian. And he said this, God himself will milk the cows through those whose vocation it is. So it's almost like God is milking the cows through the people who do that as part of their vocation. I wonder if in Cumbria, perhaps it should be mainly sheep rather than cows. But anyway. So that's a way of thinking about vocation. How is it that God wants to use my gifts, my skills, my temperament, my character, my history, my background, my experiences in making a change for him? I think one of the other missteps that we often make when it comes to thinking about vocation is that everybody has only one special thing that they are to do for God in the world, and that it's our job to kind of search that out, a bit like some kind of very complicated medieval quest. And woe betide you if you get it wrong, because you'll be stuck with doing the wrong thing for the rest of your life. And I'm not sure that's how God works either. I think all of us have several vocations, and one isn't more important than the other. So I'm called to be Matt's wife and Molly and Toby's mum and the Bishop of Penrith, and probably one or two other things as well. And all of those God knows and God uses to work together for his purposes. And it's the same with each of us. Sometimes I think when it comes to vocation, we need to think in terms of seasons rather than lifetimes. So what is your calling for one season might not be right for every season. Timing is important. So with God, the question isn't only what should you do for me, but also when? When is the right time to do it? I love that in the stories we just heard, several people spoke about the timing, about now is the time to start a new ministry. Moses had already tried to take on the role of liberator of his people, but he'd gone about it in completely the wrong way at the wrong time, and he tried to kill an Egyptian soldier. Right idea, Moses, wrong time, and definitely wrong methodology. There's a lovely story with Jesus and Peter. After Jesus has been raised from the dead, and Jesus and Peter are sat on the beach, and Peter has messed up big time. And Jesus called Peter and told him what his vocation was, told him he was to be a leader in his church and feed his sheep. And there was only one interview question. And the interview question was this: Peter, do you love me? And I think at the end of the day, all of us have one primary calling in common, and that's to be a child of God and a follower of Jesus. So as you think about vocation at the moment, my prayer is with you. And by way of encouragement, I'd like to leave you with a picture or an image. And this picture comes from my recent holiday in North Wales. We were on a long walk in Snowdonia, and we came across a really wet and boggy bit of path. We could tell it was wet and boggy because the dog fell into it. And I couldn't see how we were going to get across. But as we began to take our first steps forward, we began to see that somebody had already thought of it and had laid out stones along a path, and we just had to walk along the stones to get across safely. Now, the stones were hidden by bracken and by heather, so you couldn't really see them until you stepped nearer in faith. And that seems to me to be a really good image for exploring vocation. Often we don't really know where the boggy path might lead, but God's been there before, and God has laid out stones for us. And all we have to do is take the first step, and the rest will open up. So thank you so much for joining us today on this live stream or watching again later. Thank you for thinking and praying about vocation and what we're called to join in with God in doing. I'll be praying for you. I think I'm handing back over now to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Bishop Emma, for that. That was really inspiring and challenging. Interestingly, the first question you asked there, we have also asked of several people around the county as part of what we'd planned for the roadshows. I think what you'd like to be when you grow up is a really good question. So we're going to welcome back some of our panel just now. And actually, I'd quite like to challenge us all with that question too. So who'd like to kick off with what they would like to be when or if they ever grow up? Otherwise, I'll have to pick on someone.
I was reminded that my youngest son, when he was asked what he'd like to be when he grew up, he always said, taller than my brother.
It was a bit of a challenge for me because as a careers advisor, I kept discovering things that I thought, oh, that would have been good. But now I feel like I want to just be more of myself and less of fulfilling other people's requirements or whatever. And yeah.
I think, I mean, my honest answer is what I want to be. I want to be like my dad. I wanted to be my dad, which was lovely. But I think I've been fortunate in that growing up in a Christian home and always having that desire and that passion to serve in the church, however and when, is that question has always been inside me. What does God want me to be? What do I want to be for God? And that's driven me throughout my ministry and from before. And I think I'm blessed in having that as a natural inclination in my mind. For some of us, we have to work on that. What do you want me to be, God?
I think, turning the question on its head, I've never really thought about what I wanted to be. I've always found myself in a place where God has placed me. And that started off when I was 3 or 4 in church. And I've grown up with church and grown into church, and church has grown into me. And I have no more aspirations than than to continue with that, I think.
That was lovely. Bishop Emma, would you like to share with us your...
Well, I sort of confessed it, didn't I? You know, I secretly always wanted to be an actor, but then I think, you know, there is something in being a clergy person that there is a little bit of acting. I mean, not in the sense of, you know, pretending to be something you're not, but in the sense of performing up front. So I think, you know, God uses what's inside of us, doesn't he? And whatever he calls us to do, whatever shape of job we've got, he uses our characters and the things that we love doing and the things that we're good at doing, and he grows them into new things.
Indeed, yes. So if I were to be feeling that nudge that Chris was talking about earlier, or a little prod, or maybe for some of us it's almost like a shove, what's the best first or next step that we could be advising people about tonight, from having watched a bit of this and thinking, oh, maybe, just maybe? What words of pearls of wisdom do you all have as vocations coordinators and advisors for people?
I think it's very useful for people to know that we're not just one person on our own. Each of the 3 coordinators, and certainly I'm quite sure David's the same, has a team of vocations advisors working alongside, and there's a wealth of experience and knowledge and understanding in each of the members of our teams. And I think if somebody in church has a nudge or a tap on the shoulder or a calling, then to speak to somebody there who will likely put them in touch with a coordinator, who will then seek out the best advisor and place that person with the best possible person to be able to assist and support and develop that individual. And that person will have probably as many as 3 meetings with an advisor before determining between them just the right path to be on. So there's a lot of support out there for them.
And is this still happening even though lockdown and all of the rest of it? Valerie?
A
bit more remotely than normal. Yeah. Normally would be, of course, yes. But it certainly continues on, and people are still having conversations. And I know, speaking to David earlier, David was saying that talking to someone who you trust is a good start too. Just to be honest with somebody, you've got to start being honest with everyone who you might be talking to in the process. So start with someone you trust and explore with them. Sometimes where people have been thinking about possibly ordination, I've suggested they talk to somebody, a good friend outside the church, because that's a challenge that they're going to have to meet, and also they might have other insights from the way people see them. But that's not compulsory.
I think I think for me, Bishop Emma's first point was start with God, and that's the why question. Why am I doing it? Why am I sensing this? Why am I feeling uneasy about this situation? Why am I feeling there's something missing? Why am I feeling I could maybe? But then after that, the next and for me, the more I travel, the important question is where am I called to be? Because if we're in the wrong place, we're not at ease and we're not fulfilling that ministry. And we can't answer why am I called to be here unless we know this is the place that God's called us. When I moved up here 2 years ago from Lincolnshire, and I visited various different Methodist circuits and prayed, Lord, is it here? And no sense that God was saying, yes, David, until I came to Carlisle and I looked around Carlisle and I couldn't for some reason, I just couldn't still myself to say, Lord, is it here? Simple prayer, but I just couldn't. And I don't know why, and I was getting quite upset about this. And then I realised that in the Methodist system, it's that we're sent, and if there's a really, really powerful reason why not, then you move. But if not, then that's, the match is made. And I just thought, Lord, is there any reason why it shouldn't be here? I'm just sensed God saying, David, you're so thick sometimes. Why have I brought you all this way? I wouldn't bring you this far if it wasn't because this is where you're called to be. And it was only when I sensed that this is where I should be that I started to understand why I'm being called, what I'm being called to do, and how I'm called to be. And I think the where is the most important for me now.
That's lovely. Thank you, David. We've been having some feedback via our live stream chat as well. So I just need to remind you all, thanks, Alison, that we are hoping to pick up and run the SHAPE course again very soon beyond lockdown. That's Your Shape for God's Service. And I would say that some of our vocations team will be able to put you in touch with one that hopefully will be happening locally fairly soon around that. It's a really lovely, gentle way to just gather with a few people and explore something around your calling and try out a few bits and bobs. Esther, who we saw earlier, has said, give it a go. You might discover talents you didn't know you had. There you go, top tip. And Dave has joined us on the live stream tonight, is singing the praises and can't fault the vocational support. So thank you for that, Dave, as well. It's always good to get that encouragement and hear from someone slightly further down the vocations and journey of exploring your calling. Unless we have any really last minute questions now, or anybody else has anything really burning they'd like to add. I'm looking for a wave. I think we've had a fantastic evening just being able to get a little snippet. I know there's so much more happening around the whole county that we could have included, and we are just trying to just give you a little flavour of some of the things locally. So we would like to challenge you still to think back to those original questions that we started with, the hashtag #MyCalling. So what is it that God may be calling you and me to be and to do? What season am I in, as Bishop Emma was saying for us earlier, and what timing, what's the timing like? But just that reminder to start with and join in with God. And for anybody that would like to find out a bit more, to talk to one of these lovely vocations coordinators that you've seen and heard from tonight, all of their contact details are on our website, which is the carlislediocese.org.uk, and the / is just vocations. That takes you straight to the vocations homepage on the website, and hopefully you'll be able to see all of their details there to contact as an initial point of contact. But do just chat to somebody or listen to that person who's maybe prodding you. So I would really like to say a very big thank you to everybody that's taken part tonight, both on the screen and as well as behind the screen, keeping us all right. Thank you so much for your time and for your encouragement, and we'll bid you farewell. Last little word from Richard Passmore. There is the Pioneer Mission Certificate. They're already full this year, but you could be thinking already about signing up for that next September. Recruitment will be starting soon, so keep an eye out on the Fresh Expressions Cumbria Facebook page for more about that if you need that. Thank you so much, everybody, and may you enjoy the rest of a lovely, peaceful evening, and we'll look forward to hearing more questions and comments soon. Good night.
God bless.